Welcome to Keep Hustling, where we are going past the why to get to the how. I'm your host, the always hustling Aaron Gordon, aka NY Risk Advisor, aka Mr. Keep Hustling. And in this podcast, we will be diving deep into the professional and personal successes of our guests to find out how they hustled through the most difficult times in their life and their development to achieve the success they've gotten to today. So buckle up for what hopes to be an amazing ride. And of course, now and always, keep hustling. Welcome to Keep Hustling with my guest, Bradley Flowers. Thank you, Bradley, for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Aaron. I'm super honored to be one of the first few guests on here.
I mean, it was obviously natural. You know that you're one of my podcast inspirations, so having you on here is a bucket list item for me. I figured we'd check off the bucket list early. Plus, as you know, being a host, getting guests on early is difficult. So those people that jump on early, I am super appreciative and extra appreciative of. So really thank you for being here.
Absolutely, man. I would never say no to chopping it up with you.
There we go. So why don't we jump right into it? I know a lot about you. We don't have to go into the whole life and times of Bradley Flowers, but I know you're from Mobile, Alabama. What do we need to know about, and obviously you're successful because you're sitting in this chair, not that I'm only working with super successful people, but anyone who looks you up and in the session notes will know how successful you are. What do we need to know about the upbringing of Bradley Flowers that put you in that chair today with the Portal Insurance logo behind you?
Yeah, that's such a good question. There's a can I answer? Can I give a couple of examples?
Go for it.
So I grew up with a dad who owned his own business. So very early on, and my dad owned his own business. He purchased it in I want to say either a few years after or a few years before I was born. I think a few years after, which obviously was a big risk, and has run a successful company for over 30 years now. And then my grandfather on my dad's side was a salesman, career salesman. Picture what you think a career salesman looks and acts like. That was him. He sold everything from farming equipment to construction equipment to mobile homes. And one of my earliest memories of him, and we weren't super close in later years, but one of my earliest memories was he would take me up to the mobile home dealership that he worked at, very Alabama, right? And
We have all those in Queens, New York.
yeah, and he would walk out to deal with a customer, and he taught me how to answer the phone and what to say when I answered the phone. And so I think being exposed to sales and entrepreneurship, for lack of a better word, early, I think really shaped me. And then additionally, I went to a school that was heavily focused on athletics. There was 22 people in my graduating class, very small, very tight knit, and I was not an athlete. I was athletic. I just wasn't. I didn't really play sports. And I had a brother. My brother was the quarterback.
Yikes.
Everybody loved my brother. My sister was probably even more athletic than my brother. And so I was sort of like, not that my parents did this or anything, but like I was sort of the one that was just like kind of pushed to the side. You know what I mean? Brother made straight A's, sister made straight A's. I did not, to say the least. And I often think about how, and both of my brother and sister are successful, but I often think about my parents having conversations late at night and me being the subject, and then thinking, how did he turn out like this?
How did he turn out like this?
Yeah.
And how on God's good earth is he going to support himself one day?
But I think a lot of that, sort of chip, it gave me a little bit of chip on my shoulder, a little bit combined with the sales and exposure to business ownership and that sort of thing, really kind of propelled me to do some of the things that I needed to do. So I guess that's the best way to answer that.
So I want to drill down on that on a couple levels. One is you mentioned that you had the exposure to your grandfather on the sales floor. I'm assuming, but correct me if I'm wrong, that your siblings who were busy with athletics did not.
probably true. I do remember my brother being there with me at the mobile home dealership. Um, but he was, I mean, I was really young then. I mean, I was probably not even 13. And so my brother would have been 9. So they weren't even really old enough to, you know what I mean?
100%. But I also think that when when someone's focus is elsewhere, they don't,
Yeah.
meaning at the time you didn't realize
Hmm.
that those moments, because you were kind of zeroed in on what was going on and you weren't thinking about the football game later that night,
Hmm.
those moments could be ingrained in you in a different way and in a more concrete way than, right. It was you that was answering the phone. Nobody else was taught to answer the phone there.
Yep. Yep.
So, and I'm super interested about what you said right before you were born or right after your father took that risk. At what point were you aware that like he was a business owner and kind of the buck stopped with him? And what did you see in his hustle?
I remember, I remember when I was, got old enough to understand things about the world, probably 10 or 11. And, I'd watch TV and see like somebody get fired from their job on TV. I remember being worried that my dad was going to get fired. Not because of anything he did, but just like that was like kind of like you have the
Yeah.
fear that your house is going to burn down. You know what I mean? And I remember having that fear, and I remember my mom explained to me, actually, he's the one that does the firing, um,
You're like, that's
and
cool. That's amazing. I never thought he was that guy.
yeah, exactly. So I don't know, probably 10 or 11 ish, maybe. But my dad's a contractor, and it's a very volatile business. So I've seen the good times and the bad. But I mean, anybody that can run a successful business for 30 years, regardless of anybody's opinion, is awesome in my book.
100%. It's interesting later, as you know, I'm in a family business. And when I started working with my father, he should rest in peace, he told me that there was a day where he lost a whole slew of accounts that were connected to each other and had to fire 13 people in one day.
Oh my gosh.
And the interesting thing is, I can imagine that the day before that and that day and the day after that were probably super traumatic for him. I mean, right? Not only do you have to fire people, you have to fire people because you literally can't afford to keep them on. And if you can't afford to keep them on, what just happened to your business if you're firing more than half of
Right.
your staff? And yet as a kid, like I never remember feeling that.
Yeah.
I never felt like my dad was flying around on private jets, which he wasn't. But
I was about to ask, was he?
Yeah, no, he wasn't. He wasn't. But it wasn't like I knew that it wasn't a Fortune 500 company, but I never felt like it was going to disappear.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting that you say that like you saw that grind of the volatility of the contracting business from a young age.
It's funny, 2008, I graduated high school 2007. 2008 was a really rough year for anybody in business, especially around contracting. And I remember he had 2 big jobs that didn't pay him a large sum of money, and those people filed bankruptcy. I think one of them was legitimate. The other one was the guy just trying to skirt paying vendors. And while I knew there was struggle, we didn't really ever want for anything. I didn't grow up rich or anything like that. But I never felt like, I always felt like, yeah, luxuries I couldn't get, but like as far as like just basic necessities, and there was never an activity that I wanted to be a part of as far as school or friend group or anything like that I wasn't able to be a part of. But something interesting, man, you talk about like you ever think about something like your dad having to fire those people? You ever think about something like years ago and you think, man, that'd make phenomenal content nowadays?
100%.
And this may not be exactly factually accurate, but I remember, I'm pretty sure my dad, if he was not so he worked for the company that he bought.
Mine too.
If he was not the low man on the totem pole, he was really close to it. And he went to work one day as the low man on the totem pole, and the next day was the owner.
It's like there's that, I don't know, are you a Billions fan?
I watched one episode, and that very first scene with the dude in the hotel room turned me off of that show.
So I'm not a huge watcher, but there is a scene where he, I forgot the guy's name even, the guy in Billions goes back and basically renames a museum. And he renames the museum because he found out that the people who had previously endowed it were on Financial Times. And he goes into the boardroom and they have no idea who he is. And he basically describes that he was their caddy one time. And they spoke so down to him that he made it like his life's mission. Not that that's what I'm with job, but it's interesting that
kind of stuff.
It's
like Ari
that would have been
Gold
great
in,
content.
Ari Gold in Entourage shooting people with a paintball gun.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and I remember, there was at least one guy, if not multiple guys, that worked there that were my dad's superiors that now they're his subordinates 24 hours later, and I think there was some tension there.
But I feel like you and I are dreaming of better content that there was. I feel like it wasn't like he walked in one day.
Yeah,
they said, Mr. Flowers, you can't go in there, and he said, actually, I can. It's my office.
He my dad totally handled it in the most diplomatic way. He's like the nicest guy ever. He, I've talked about in content before. He taught me you don't burn bridges in business. He does that to the utmost extreme. And I think I'm too extreme the other way. I think both of us need to come a little bit.
Well, that's because you're thinking about the dramatic content.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so that was interesting seeing that growing up. And, I worked with him when I was 16, but his age versus my age, I think he definitely always secretly dreamed us going into the family business, but his age versus my age, I was going to have to wait a long time before I took over the reins. And as much as I'm into like delegation and that sort of thing, my dad is not a fan of that.
That's generational.
Yeah. And so that's why I chose to sort of do my own thing. So
do you think that watching that, when you talk about 2007, 2008, that's like prime time when you're choosing a career. So you're not 9 or 10 years old answering the phone anymore. And one of the things about the industry that we've both chosen is they say that the gold is, and the best part is the recurring revenue. And so you went from, I think there's something there. We're going through a business where it's contract to contract, literally item to item, like we're going to buy X product that we need or, supplies, and then hope that the person pays us for them after we put them in their house, to something that has more quote unquote stable recurring revenue. There's got to be something there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was my dad that encouraged me to pursue the recurring revenue and actually explained to me what it was.
Right.
And now, Aaron, the few businesses I've ventured out into, whether it be as a limited partner or an investor or something like that haven't worked, I learned very early on in my sort of side project career, separate from Portal, that my strengths are in recurring revenue businesses,
right?
Not non-recurring. One of the first companies I did separate to Portal was I partnered with a gal in a mortgage company, and I realized very quickly that I didn't have, I was not passionate about it. And part of the reason I did it was to learn that industry better so that then Portal could serve loan officers better. That was the reason I did it. And with the kind of secret notion that, hey, maybe one day I'll do Portal mortgages. But then I realized, like, wait a minute, not only is this business does not have any recurring revenue whatsoever, so you can't plan at all. Whereas in insurance, you just look at last year's revenue, you're going to lose a certain percentage.
100%.
We're going to pay our bills. It's not like that in that industry. Not only that, it's, with interest rates and everything, is so dependent upon the economy and government and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I definitely agree with that.
So there was a shift, because I know that you went from being, like your father, the employee to the employer, maybe not in the same business. Take us back to the most pivotal moment so far in your career, in your hustle, and that doesn't have to be the day you made the most money.
Yeah. Man, there's several. Like, we could actually A/B test this, and I could give you like 5. There's one though that I'm going to give you 2.
Well, let me stop you for a second.
Okay.
We're going to have fun here a little bit on here.
Okay.
Try to not. This is where the student becomes the teacher.
Okay.
Don't think about You said A/B testing. What's going to produce the best
Yeah,
content?
exactly.
That's not what this is about. This is about the hustle, right? So,
Yeah.
we can. I want to know deep down. I'm going to press you on it. Deep down in my original reach out memo that I've mentioned in other episodes,
Mhm.
I said we're going to laugh. We might cry. So I'm not going to shy away from this. When I say most pivotal moment,
Yeah.
could have been the most difficult moment that you hustled through. What comes to your mind? Not 5.
Yeah. So there's 2, but they're kind of connected. So it's kind of the
Okay.
same thing. All right. So Scott and I started the podcast. I was still captive. And when I was captive, I was company man. And I said that a lot to my superiors. Like I was all about it. They paid me good money. It was the perfect storm for someone who had entrepreneurial tendencies with no resources to be an entrepreneur because I got paid really good. I could kind of call 75% of the shots. You know what I mean? And it was great. Looking back, I should have felt that way for 3 years, and then the last 3 years I shouldn't have felt that way, and I should have left. But Scott and I started a podcast, Insurance Guys Podcast, and we visited Chris Paradiso, and we were learning about all these crazy ways that you could run your agency and these different cool things you could do. And we basically spent a day getting $100,000 worth of consulting, and we were on our way back from Chris's office in the Uber, and Scott looked at me and he's like, "You know, this whole trip is going to be worthless unless you leave Alpha, right? It's not. You can't do any of this stuff. Like you did, literally wasted."
And he was
your time
independent
up
at the
here."
time.
No, he was still captive too, but Nationwide they could get direct contracts on the commercial side, and I think Nationwide had already announced they were going to go independent, so he kind of was already, 2 steps ahead of me.
So I just want to paint the picture. Here's 2 company men working
Yeah.
on the captive side. For those who don't know, on the captive in the insurance industry, captive means you represent one company. You all heard of your local State Farm agent, like a
State
good
Farm,
neighbor,
Allstate,
Allstate,
Geico agents are
Geico,
captive.
all those agents nationwide used to be that way. And so they went to visit Scott, and Bradley went to visit Scott, the other co-host of the Insurance Guys podcast, who
Yeah.
has also been a guest or will be a guest in the podcast. And now they're in the Uber going back after spending a day with someone, a mutual friend of ours, Chris Paradiso, who is already independent.
Yeah. So Chris
Sorry,
Paradiso.
just wanted to paint. Just
Yeah.
wanted to
Sorry.
paint the
I
picture
forget
there.
we don't have just an insurance office here, but
That's it.
we went to visit Chris's office, who is a gigantic agency in the independent agency
And the
world.
ultimate independent. The ultimate
Yeah,
independent.
exactly. And so, yeah, Scott's like, and I appreciate, at the time it kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but I appreciate him pushing me a little bit and saying, you're like, you're not going to do it. Like, you've got to leave. And so fast forward, well, my wife is a captive agent, separate from me. And much like how independent agents and captives are the Hatfields and McCoys, independent agents don't like captive agents typically. Obviously, I do. I married one. But independent agents typically don't like captive agents because they just don't understand how someone could want to do that. And then captive agents don't like independent agents. There's this inherent, like, because it's 2 different sides of the industry. And
How could you be married to more than one company?
Yeah, exactly. And like in fact, Aaron, I believe that too. The very first video I made, the very first piece of content I made where my face was on camera and it was not a still picture, I was talking about an independent agent down the street who said some negative things about us to a customer, and I was that person's insurance agent.
Is that still live? Can we link that in the show notes?
I can
Is that
find
piece
it.
of content
Yeah, I
live?
can
We're
find
going
it.
to try to find it.
And
Okay.
and I
We're going to try to find it.
made a piece of content about you can't sell a product you don't own, directed at that person. And so there's this, and so my wife being a captive agent, I remembered being worried how she was going to react.
Interesting.
And I remember,
Now we're getting to what would have been good content.
yeah, well, the 2 are kind of connected because this happened like the next day. And so this was probably November. It was whenever Chris's birthday is when we went. And because we were there on Chris's birthday, I remember that. It was Scott saying happy birthday to him. And if you guys don't know my co-host Scott, he's a character. I think you had him on as a previous guest.
Yeah, he's on the list.
Okay, good time to reference that episode number. So he anyway, I remember sitting at the table and I was having a real hard time at the captive company because I was just not getting along with some people. There was another agent that was literally driving around to my, I've never told this story, driving around to my customers getting AORs signed. And he was being encouraged by the home office to do that.
So that means someone was driving around to your
Stealing
customers,
business.
getting letters signed that take away your business.
Yeah. Stealing
Game on.
business. And he was being encouraged by the home office to do that. I'll tell you that story later, not off the air, but they just weren't supporting me in ways. And I remember sitting at my kitchen table and I started crying, like, a good bit. And she thought I was crying because of what was happening at work. I was crying because I was scared how she was going to react. And, hey, I want to do this thing and you're going to tell me not to do it. And then we're going to have to deal with that. And I told her, I remember I said exact words, I think I want to open an independent agency. And she was like, it's awesome. I'll support you. And,
Scott tipped her off.
I don't think he did. That would be very much a Scott Howell thing to do. But most of all of the money that I used to start came from her.
Well, let me ask you about that, because that really is a lot about what this podcast is about. It's about hustling through that exact moment.
And that was the thing. Like, if that was the thing, like that, and from then on, it was like, all right, let's go pedal to the metal. Getting that support from her was like everything I needed. Like, okay, like, let's go. Strength in numbers, I guess.
Well, I didn't know you then,
right?
Obviously, but do you think that it's possible that her knowing you for however long she knew you at that moment, and obviously knowing you very well, that she didn't know that eventually one day you were going to want to own your own business, whether it would have been a captive agency that then did something or
I don't know. I think it was more, hey, he's so miserable and I'm going to like encourage him to do the thing that he's not going to be miserable at. Number one. Number two, there had been talks about me joining her agency. Nothing very serious, but there were talks. I do think that you're a big fan of the Hormozis, Alex and Layla,
sure,
co-CEOs. I don't think most people should do that.
Well, you know that my parents were basically co-CEOs.
Yeah, same thing. Right? Yeah, so, yeah. I think not because you can't get along or anything like that, but I think you need to hedge your bets, diversify. You know what I mean?
I haven't told this story on air, but there's not many things that I remember. So my mother is she immigrated to America from a displaced persons camp after the Holocaust in Italy, and her parents were Holocaust survivors, and they started a company in Syracuse, New York, importing wholesale food.
Okay.
They worked together. My grandmother, she ran the office, and my grandfather kind of ran the floor. He should rest in peace. And the interesting thing about their business is I don't remember anything from my grandmother's funeral. I was 7 when she passed away, but I do remember that my uncle, my mother's brother, said, I remember we were sitting in the front row and he said, the one thing I learned from my parents in Syracuse, New York, is never to work with your spouse. And then he said, Goldie, that's my mom, clearly didn't get the message because she worked with my father. But I think that part, it's a whole nother level of support. You're saying that Laurel took the leap, was willing to support you emotionally, financially, in hustling to your entrepreneurial destiny. But in the end of the day, she had a business that was making money, and like she didn't jump into the pool with you. She supported you as the lifeguard, but she didn't jump into the deep end with you.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, by the way, I think that's the smarter thing to do. I think we can both agree that that's the smarter thing to do. But it's just interesting that like she believed in it enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting too, because when she started her, when you start any business, especially an insurance agency, both of us started with employees day one, you're going to be in the red for a little while. And when she started her business, I was at Alpha making good money. We got married. And so I sort of supported her to a degree from a paying the bills standpoint. I didn't give her any money to start anything like that, like she did me. And then she started March 1st of 2017. I opened Portal March 1st of 2019. And
Interesting.
which was not intentional. It just sort of fell that way. And then so she supported me without, not having to pay myself. And I think that we were in business. I was able to work almost 24 months, if not right at 24 months, without paying myself, which was a huge catalyst to our success. So Friday of this week, another agency owner drove down here from Georgia to do a half a day of consulting with me, like me helping him. And very similar situations. And the biggest catalyst is his wife was not able to pay their bills while he runs the agency. And that's, I mean, we're probably half the size we are now if it wasn't for that, because I think that's the piece I think that gets, and I recognize that I had a huge advantage by having that spousal support, that, hey, I know the bills at home are going to be paid and I can really grow this thing. And even when I paid myself, I mean, we're talking, in some of the New York people listening to this are going to laugh. I think my first salary was $24,000. So I paid myself $2,000 a month, and which was nothing. I remember we had a team member at that time who's no longer here that was upset about his compensation, which some of it was valid. And I remember telling him, like, dude, you're making double what I'm making.
Double what I'm making.
Like, and he's like, well, you've got enterprise value and long time. I was like, yeah, I totally understand. Yeah, I get it. But I'm
not ripping
not
$100,000 off the
Scrooge
top
McDuck over here. Like, and
So
even still, so.
I want to drill down on that from the hustle here, and that is when I'm sure that there were times when you weren't paying yourself, or when things didn't, because I know the business, but I also have never been in your chair and never been the guy who started the business and actually has to keep the lights on. I'm sure that there were moments where you wanted to maybe quit or doubt your decision. How did the fact that you knew that she was waiting when you went home, the person who supported you not only emotionally but financially at that moment, and believed in your hustle at that moment, how did that push you to keep hustling?
Oh, 1,000%. Like, I mean, and mainly because we have different skill sets that complement each other. Yeah, I jokingly refer to her as my CFO. She's got a math degree, and I think she's got a business degree, math degree.
And she doesn't have shiny object syndrome.
She doesn't have shiny object syndrome. She's very unemotional when it comes to money. I'm very emotional when it comes to money and things. And we have different skill sets. And sometimes when things are not good, she can sort of bring me back to home base. So not only from just hey, I want to get back to my person, but this person's like way smarter than me and can help me rationalize this. You know what I mean? Like I remember there was a day this year, actually. So there's two times, but there was one this year where we had a really bad month. We had a really, really bad month P&L wise. And I had made an investment in a piece of technology that is panning out, but it's a piece of technology we built. I'd taken a shot on an SEO service that did not pan out, not because of that company, and it's not a company that anybody listening to this would know, but because SEO takes some time. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And it was really expensive, and I should not have done it. And there was a few more things. We had like a bad production month, so we were like in the red a pretty significant amount. Not enough that it would hurt the company or dip into our reserves or anything like that. It was just a bad month, right? And I had just at that moment changed the way that I did the P&L, because I always did my books. And so I ran them every day. If you may remember me saying that in previous pieces of content, I ran them every day. I knew to the day where I was P&L wise, which was really like strategically good, because it prevented me from taking some risk and, that sort of thing. Well, I
Except,
had started, except I was doing it wrong. And I had started, I had my bookkeeper do it. Well, she's doing it a month in arrears. And not only that, she's doing it 2 weeks into the new month. And so I felt really out of touch, not out of control, but out of touch because I'm looking at stuff way in the past. And so we just had like a bad day and it just really stressed me out. And I remember going home and like sitting there like, okay, here's the deal. Like, and she was like, yeah, it's no big deal. Like that happens. Like just saying that was everything I needed to hear. But then it's like, okay, we broke it down. Hey, look, you did this thing, you did this thing. Like, there's a difference between being in the red with a bunch of one-time expenses versus being in the red with a bunch of recurring expenses. You know what I mean?
sure.
So yeah, 100%. And the other thing is like you guys listening to this would be shocked at how little two people who are basically in the same industry don't talk about what happened at the end of the day. Like neither one of us just most of the time don't want to talk about it. Like I'll have State Farm friends call me to tell me stuff and I'll be like, oh really? And they're like, you didn't know that? And I'm like, no, that's hilarious. Like you guys don't talk about it at all. But we do actually have this sort of unwritten rule where she'll look at me or I'll look at her and say like, hey, I need to unload on you for about 5 minutes.
Love
And then
that.
usually the other person will say, is this a problem I need to solve? Or do you just want me to listen?
I'm going to take that. I like that. I'm going to steal that. Relationship advice with Bradley Flowers.
And there's been times where it's happened more with Portal with issues and it kind of swings back and forth. It's never, we both have issues at the same time that are really bad. And right now she's going through a tough season, like staffing and that sort of thing. And so, yeah.
And I guess for you, that probably the person who was the recipient before makes you want to give back to that, even in the subconscious, saying like, in my moment of greatest need, you took the leap of faith on me and inspired me or for me, and therefore, I feel the need. I want to give that back, and so having that opportunity probably creates a better space for both of you because you're both able to kind of feel that and see that and do that.
And she's very good too. She compliments me in that, like, I don't breathe unless I get to work. I can't breathe, whereas she's sort of the opposite of that. Like her work is a mechanism that allows her to do like family stuff that she wants to do. It's kind of, we've never talked about this, kind of my perception of it, And so those two things I think complement each other really well. So
I didn't think I was going to ask this question, but let's just do it. This is what it's about. You have a son.
Mm-hmm.
You also have a daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And the industry that you've chosen is one of those historic. It's not like the contracting business. The contracting business, it can be a parent-child thing, but it's not.
Not as much.
I don't want to say expected. But you know what I mean? Like when we hear, myself included, that a child or a nephew or a grandchild or a son-in-law of somebody who's in the insurance business goes in their business, like, of course, but do you, how do you feel like looking at them and saying, how do you try to inspire them to think about their careers and maybe coming into your business?
Well, me and the 2-year-old don't have many career talks yet. Although I think he has the greatest chance of, he's either going to be an insurance agent or he's going to be an injury attorney. He's either two parents that are insurance agency owners. He's either going to do insurance or he's going to do the complete opposite of that.
Exactly.
One of those.
Exactly.
So there's that. My daughter, I don't know that she would be the agency owner. I don't know that that's her personality. I could definitely see her working in the agency. I could definitely see her getting into some sort of marketing because she's very artistic, way more artistic than I am. I'm sort of secretly training my future graphic designer and marketing CMO, head of brand.
Always thinking about content. Here we go. We can't get this guy off the train.
I do think about it. So on one hand, I think I have no interest in selling my company. Like I started this, somebody asked me the other day why I didn't take investor money when I started Portal, and I had multiple opportunities to take way more money than I started with. And the two answers to that are, one, I wanted this to be the thing I did forever. Like no matter what I did in the world, like Portal was always going to be there. Like it's always been the long-term thing. And then two, investors tend to want returns. That's usually why they do it. And you can't really get good returns in investing in insurance agents unless insurance agencies sell. And I didn't want to have to be, force my hand or felt like I needed to sell to pay these people back. And then two, I didn't want to have to answer to anyone, because that was my biggest complaint at the captive company, is I always had to answer to somebody. So Portal was always designed to be like the thing I did forever, and never. I'm in such a place right now that I don't know that I would ever sell it. Even if I got tired of working it, I would just hire somebody to run it. Like the money's good in insurance, right? So I could definitely, in that retrospect, see, or in that spirit, see that one of the kids could definitely take it over. But then the flip side of that is we're growing so fast and acquiring agencies and that sort of thing. I could definitely see somebody coming in and offering a stupid amount of money that I have to say yes to. And I could definitely see that happening before Luke is old enough to actually work here. You know what I mean? So I could see both sides, but I definitely like the thought of kid coming into the agency for sure. And I'm definitely going to approach that a different way than most situations, because, and I think your dad did too, but you see some of these like family agencies, and it's like you have the dad, you have the son or the daughter, and then every other employee hates that son or daughter. You know what I mean? So we want to make sure and do it the right way. But I guess that would be I know I kind of like circled around it, but
Yeah, it's interesting because there's two kind of views on that. And I don't know why I just thought of this when I'm talking to you, but obviously because we both have kids and we're both kind of in the seats that we're in. But it's like there's two kind of next generation principals, managers, whatever you want to call them. There's the ones that felt they were forced,
yeah,
and there's the ones who felt the polar opposite. I've never found someone in the middle. It's almost like I either, like my parents never mentioned it.
yeah.
And obviously, I mean, I have 4 siblings who are not in the business.
And it
So
probably
obviously
makes you want to do it more.
so when you get into it, it's kind of, it's this weird, I don't want to say guilt because it's not guilt, but it's kind of like, we didn't force you to be here.
Yeah.
We like, and that kind of led, obviously gave them a chip, not in a bad way, to be able to say, this is how we do things. Kind of, I feel like if you're a kid and you start out in another business, and let's say, for instance, there's an issue with the books, and you're a finance guy or gal or accounting, and you come in, you clean up the books, and like, hey, you should be the CFO. It's kind of like, I clean that up for you. So what I would say to anyone who's in a family business, or anyone who's looking at continue a family business, is I am really lucky. And I think this is what you were referencing, that, my parents kind of didn't force me to do things their way. There were some things that were non-negotiable in the way we did business. And then there were what's interesting is, and you talk about, your daughter being creative and things like that, is when you understand what the foundations of what's not negotiable, then you realize what that means, that everything else you can kind of have some sort of freedom with. It's not.
Yeah.
And so I just think that when we talk about legacy or hustle or things like that, it's, I guess what I think you said, and I would agree with, is that it's something that's always in your mind, because how could it not be? But yet there are so many things that have to fall into place for that to happen, that it wouldn't be shocking if that didn't happen as well.
Yeah. I think too, building, so like my dad, much like many business owners who have kids that are coming of age, my dad forced me to go into his business and work, drag me into it, so to speak. And my brother too. I remember my brother's first day. My mother was the bookkeeper / receptionist for my dad. So this is another couple that works together. And my mom called, and it was, you guys probably didn't have these in New York, but they were like the Southern Link beep beep radios, like the Nextel beep beep radios, so you could hear what
we had those, of course.
Saying. And my mom, beeped him in and said, the funeral home has a light out in their prep room. And I remember looking at my brother going, "Oh, first day." But I I think the best thing to do with bringing kids into a company, yes, they need to start at the bottom, but you also need to build around their strengths. And I think
And the
too many,
likelihood is that their strengths are not the same as yours.
correct, build around their strengths, but then also embrace their strengths too. Let them, give them some room to play, to experiment and that sort of thing. And I look at a good example of that as there's a tech company in the insurance space called HawkSoft that the dad, Paul Hawkins, is the CEO, and the son, Shane Hawkins, is really good at coding and writing software. So he writes all the software for the company. It's like they're not, he's not. Paul doesn't make him be a CEO. He's, hey, you're gonna write the software. And so I think just building around the strengths of a kid, like I would love nothing more than to have a kid that's really good at marketing or really good at bookkeeping or that sort of thing. Like, hey, you take this thing and run with it. You know what I mean? And that's not to say that person can't morph into and become the CEO one day. You know what I mean?
100%.
But at the same time, starting with taking the trash out. Like that's where you need to start.
Exactly.
But you can write software on your own time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
On the weekends.
Exactly.
We close this podcast by asking our guests to share their current favorite, could be all-time favorite, inspirational, motivational quote that's inspiring their hustle today and every day. What's yours?
Anger is weakness.
Anger is weakness.
Mm-hmm. That has been top of mind for me a lot lately, and I don't know that that's the exact quote. Jocko Willink. I think it's, and I don't have an anger problem or anything like that, but I think it's really easy. You've got so many balls in the air, so many plates spinning at a company or a couple of companies or in family life and that sort of thing to project anger when you disagree with something or upset. And for me, I do get angry, but a lot of times I internalize it, which is worse in a way. But I think when you recognize that anger is actually weakness and it's really the strong people that handle things very mild-mannerly, there's a really good mindset shift with that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for the openness. Thank you for inspiring our hustle. This has been Keep Hustling with our guest, Bradley Flowers. And as we end every episode, remember, do well by doing good so you can create that legacy. And of course, as always, keep hustling. All right, hustlers, that brings us to the end of another fantastic episode. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. If you have any suggestions, comments, or even just want to say hello, please feel free to reach out to us on all social media platforms. We are Keep Hustling Pod. Until next time, stay curious, stay hungry, and keep hustling.